In this lesson, we're going to work on factoring when the leading coefficient of the trinomial is greater than 1. So the first thing that we want to always do is look for a GCF. And then after that, you want to follow the steps listed to the left. But you want to look for a GCF first thing always, because you might be able to simplify the problem and then you wouldn't have to do this process. All right, so for example 3a, we're going to look at the three terms and see if there's a GCF for the three terms, and there is not. So then we're going to take the leading coefficient, which is your a value, and multiply it times c. So 2 times negative 18 is negative 36. And we're going to look for two factors of negative 36 that add up to negative 9. So we know that if this is a negative sign, then we have to have opposite signs for our two factors. So we're going to have a positive factor and a negative factor. And we know that between them, when we add them together, the result has to be negative. So the bigger factor needs to be negative. So then I'm going to list out the factors in order, and this is just a process to show you how to find your factors if you're struggling. If you can guess them quickly, just go for it. But I'm just going to start with 1, and I'm going to divide 36 by 1. So 1 times 36 is 36. I'm going to make the bigger factor negative. And then when I add them, the sum of those two numbers is negative 35. So again, this side of the table is for the product, and this side is for the sum of the two factors. So then I'll move on to 2. And 2 times negative 18 is negative 36. Again, I'm making the bigger factor negative so that when I add them, the result is a negative sum. So this gives me negative 16, which again is not the sum that I'm looking for. So I'm going to move on to 3. So if I'm not sure, I would divide 36 by 3, and that's 12. And again, I'm making the bigger factor negative, and 3 minus 12 is negative 9, and that's what I was looking for. So we multiplied a times c, that was step 1. Then we found the two factors of a times c that have a sum equal to b, and now we're going to set up our two factors. So x plus 3 for this positive 3 here, and then x minus 12 for the negative 12 factor here. Now this is what you've learned to do already when the leading coefficient was not a number. When, well, it was a number, it just wasn't a number greater than 1. So if I just stopped here and said, okay, this is good, well, that's a problem, because if I went to multiply x times x to FOIL these back out, my result should give me the original problem back again. But if I multiply x times x, that only gives me x squared. That does not give me 2x squared. So this is not a reasonable answer. And this is one of the problems that we run into with this shortcut of slide and divide, is that students stop after they slide and they forget the final step, which is to divide. So we can tell that this result is not reasonable, so we need to continue with the process of slide and divide. So this was the slide part, and now we have to divide. So we're going to divide the two factors by the leading coefficient that we originally multiplied by. And then if it can simplify, we'll simplify, and if it can't, you'll bring the denominator number in as your coefficient. So here, 3 over 2, the fraction 3 over 2 does not simplify, and so you'll bring that 2 inside here and give it a home in the front of the parentheses. And then on the other fraction, 12 divided by 2 is 6. So we'll replace the 12 over 2 with 6, and it'll just be x minus 6. So our final answer is 2x plus 3 times x minus 6. And then it's always a great idea to check your work by using FOIL. And that's where you'll multiply them back together again. So 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 6 is negative 12x. 3x times x is positive 3x. And 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. So my first term matches my first term. My last term matches my last term. And if I add these two together, that gives me negative 9x. So it checks. These are the factors And so this was our goal. Let's try another one. So first thing we want to do is look for a GCF. There is no common factor here because 8 and 30 could divide by 2, but 7 cannot, so we do not have a GCF. So we're going to multiply the leading coefficient, 8 times 7, and that gives us 56. So we're looking for two factors of 56 that add up to negative 30, and that negative 30 comes from right here. This is a positive product, and so we'll have to have two of the same sign factors. So we're either going to have two positive numbers, because a positive times a positive equals a positive, or we'll have to have two negatives, because a negative times a negative equals a positive. And because the sign of the sum number is negative, that tells me that we're going to have the two negatives. So we'll start with 156, and we'll make them both negative. That adds up to negative 57, so that's not the one. So then we'll move on to 2. Just do 56 divided by 2 in your calculator if you can't do it in your head quickly. 2 times 28 is 56, make them both negative, and they add up to negative 30. So that's our goal. So then we'll write the factors, x minus 2 and x minus 28, and we did the slide step, so now we must divide. So we'll divide by 8 on both of these. Now 2 over 8 simplifies to 1/4, and 28 over 8 simplifies to 7 over 2. Numerator and denominator are both divisible by 4, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just dividing the top and the bottom both by 4 here and by 2 here. But if you have a reliable calculator, you can put it in there and it'll simplify it for you. And then we still have fractions. You can't have fractions in your factors, so we'll take our denominators and move them inside to the front. So that'll become 4x minus 1 and 2x minus 7. And then we'll just double check and make sure that our answer is reasonable. 4x times 2x is 8x squared. 4x times negative 7 is negative 28x. Negative 1 times 2x is negative 2x. And negative 1 times negative 7 is positive 7. 8x squared. We have 7 at the end. And our two terms in the middle add up to negative 30x. On example C, first we'll do our check for our GCF, which there is none. So now we're ready to slide and divide. So we'll take 6 times negative 4, that's negative 24. So we're looking for two things that multiply to negative 24 and add up to negative 5. So we know that the product number is negative, so we're going to have opposite signs. A negative times a positive equals a negative. And the sum is negative, so the bigger factor is going to be negative. So if I start with 1 and 24, I'll make the bigger number negative, and that'll give me negative 23. Then I'll move on to 2. 2 times 12 is 24. 2 minus 12 is negative 10. Then I'll move on to 3. So I'm dividing 24 by 3 to find the factors that give me 24 when I multiply, and that's 3 times 8. And 3 minus 8 is negative 5, and so that's my goal. So now I'll set up my factors, x plus 3 and x minus 8, and I'll divide. Now I'm going to simplify. 3 over 6 simplifies to 1/2, and 8 over 6 simplifies to 4/3. Again, I'm dividing by 2, top and bottom here, dividing by 3, top and bottom here, just simplifying fractions. And then we cannot leave fractions as our factors, so we'll bring the denominators into the front. So 2x plus 1 and 3x minus 4. Notice that I am bringing this bottom number to the front on both of these and not the top number. That's a common error that students make. So these are our factors, and then we'll just check the reasonableness of our answer and make sure that it makes sense. So 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2 times negative 4, that's negative 8x. 1 times 3, that's positive 3x. And 1 times negative 4, 6x squared. Negative 4 at the end. And these two add up to negative 5x. So it works. So for example, D, same thing. We're going to look for a GCF, but there's no common factor for these three terms, so then we'll slide and divide. 3 times 32 is 96. So we're looking for two factors of 96 that add up to negative 20. So we have a positive product, so we're going to have the same sign for both, so either two positives or two negatives. And then since the sum number is negative, I know they're both going to be negative. I'll start with 1 and 96. 1 times 96 is 96. That gives me negative 97, which is obviously way off. So then I'm going to divide 96 by 2. And 2 times 48 is 96. Make them both negative, and that gives me negative 50. Then I'll move on to 3. 96 divided by 3 is 32. And that adds up to negative 35. So then we'll move on to 4. 96 divides by 4 24 times. And that gives us negative 28. Now you can see that we're getting closer. We started with 97 and then we got negative 97, negative 50, negative 35, negative 28. We're getting closer and closer to our goal. So we know we haven't passed it because we've used every factor in order. So now I'd move on to 5, but 96 doesn't divide evenly by 5, so I'll skip it and I'll move on to 6. 96 divided by 6 is 16. Make them both negative. Negative 6 and negative 16 is negative 22. So we haven't reached our goal yet, but we're getting closer. So then I divide 96 by 7, and it doesn't divide evenly. So then I'll move on to 8. 96 divided by 8 is 12. So we get negative 8 and negative 12, which gives us negative 20. So we found it. That one took a long time. You don't have to guess them in order. You don't have to list them in order. But it does help when the number is big and it has a lot of factors. If you do that, it just helps you know that you're on the right track and you haven't overlooked any possibilities. So then I'm going to put my x minus 8 and x minus 12 into factors. And again, if we slide, we must divide. We're going to divide by 3. 8 over 3 doesn't simplify, so we'll bring the 3 to the front. And then 12 divided by 3 is 4, so x minus 4. And then that's it. Let's check and see if it makes sense. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 4 is negative 12x. Negative 8 times x is negative 8x. And negative 8 times negative 4 is positive 32. So we got the 3x squared for this term, we got the 32 here, and when you add these two together, it gives you negative 20x, so it's correct. So our answer, our two factors are 3x minus 8 and x minus 4. There are other methods to do this. Your teacher might have taught you using a grouping method or a box method. Also, some teachers show this instead of using a chart, they use a big X and put the 96 up here and the negative 20 down here. It's the same concept. And so if that looks more familiar to you and you prefer to use that method, you can. I just like the list because it leaves no options unexplored. Now you're ready to practice. Good luck.